Something extraordinary is happening right now in American politics, and I genuinely believe that years from now, historians and political scientists are going to look back at this exact moment and recognize it as a critical turning point. What we are witnessing is nothing short of a political unraveling, a desperate scramble by the most powerful law enforcement agency in the United States to protect one man, and the beginning of what appears to be genuine defections from the MAGA movement by people who spent years, in some cases nearly a decade, dedicating their lives to Donald Trump. And let me be absolutely clear with you from the outset. This is not hyperbole. This is not wishful thinking from the left. This is documented, verifiable, and happening in real time right before our eyes. The Department of Justice, which is supposed to serve the American people, which is supposed to be an impartial arbiter of justice, which is supposed to investigate crimes without fear or favor, is literally spamming Twitter right now, desperately trying to get ahead of bombshell revelations contained in the newly released Epstein files. And high-profile MAGA influencers, people with hundreds of thousands of followers, people who mocked liberals for years, people who felt entitled to Trump's victory because they dedicated their lives to his campaign, are now publicly apologizing and admitting they were wrong. Before we dive deep into all of this, and trust me, we are going to unpack every single layer of this extraordinary situation. If you find this content valuable and you want to support independent coverage of these critical issues, please take a moment to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an update. We are living through historic times, and staying informed has never been more important. Now, let us get into it. Let me paint the picture of what is happening right now, because the scope of this is genuinely unprecedented. The Department of Justice, under the Trump administration, has been forced by Congress to release documents related to Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted sex offender who allegedly ran a massive trafficking operation involving some of the most powerful men in the world. And the contents of these documents, the third tranche of releases, have sent the Trump administration into what can only be described as full-blown panic mode. We are not talking about a measured response. We are not talking about a carefully crafted statement released through proper channels. We are talking about the official Department of Justice social media account, the account that represents the entire federal law enforcement apparatus of the United States government, spamming replies to journalists, news outlets, social media personalities, and anyone who dares to discuss these documents. Think about that for a moment. Really let it sink in. The Department of Justice of the United States of America is acting like a desperate social media manager for a crisis PR firm, frantically trying to control a narrative that is spiraling completely out of their control. Now, let me take you through exactly what has happened, step by step, because the details matter here. On Tuesday, just 2 days before Christmas, and we should talk about the timing of that because it is absolutely intentional, the Department of Justice released the third batch of Jeffrey Epstein records. And almost immediately, before most journalists had even had time to thoroughly review the documents, the DOJ issued what can only be described as a combative, preemptive defense of Donald Trump. Not a defense of the integrity of the documents. Not a statement about the investigative process. Not a commitment to following the evidence wherever it leads. No, they issued a defense of Donald Trump specifically, arguing that some of the files contained, and I am quoting here, unfounded and false claims about Trump. Now, I want you to really think about what that means. The Department of Justice, before anyone had even fully analyzed these documents, before journalists and researchers had time to cross-reference claims and verify information, decided that their top priority was to get out in front of this and protect the president. That is not how a legitimate law enforcement agency operates. That is how a personal legal defense team operates. That is how a PR crisis management firm operates. That is how an organization that is more interested in protecting one man than in pursuing justice operates. Among the documents released was something that immediately caught the attention of journalists, researchers, and the public alike. It was a letter, allegedly written by Jeffrey Epstein to Larry Nassar, the former USA gymnastics doctor who was convicted of sexually abusing hundreds of young women and girls. And in this letter, according to reports, there were references that implicated Donald Trump in similar crimes. Now, the moment this letter started circulating, the Department of Justice went into overdrive. They claimed the letter was fake. They said they were investigating it. And then just 2 hours later, they announced that they had conclusively determined it was fake. 2 hours. Think about how absurd that is. They went from investigating to conclusively determining in 120 minutes. And what was their evidence? What proof did they offer to support this conclusion? They made a series of claims. They said the postmark on the envelope was from Virginia, not New York, where Epstein was jailed at the time. They said the return address listed the wrong jail. They said the envelope was processed 3 days after Epstein's death. Now let us be clear about something important here. These are claims. These are assertions. The Department of Justice did not release the evidence supporting these claims. They did not release the handwriting analysis. They did not provide documentation showing how they reached these conclusions so quickly. They simply made assertions and expected the public to accept them as gospel truth. And here is where it gets truly extraordinary. The Department of Justice official social media account then began systematically replying to every major account that was discussing this letter. They replied to the Wall Street Journal. They replied to Kyle Griffin, the senior legal affairs reporter for Politico. They replied to TMZ. They replied to Pop Bass. They replied to Midas Touch. They replied to Breaking 911. They replied to Forbes. They replied to CNN. They replied to investigative journalists who have spent years covering the Epstein case. Over and over and over again, the same message. This letter is fake. This letter is fake. This letter is fake. This is not normal behavior for a law enforcement agency. This is not how serious institutions conduct themselves. This is the behavior of an organization in full-blown panic mode, desperately trying to shape a narrative before it gets away from them. And here is the thing that really tells you everything you need to know about what is happening here. They are not just defending the integrity of the documents or the investigative process. They are specifically, repeatedly, obsessively defending Donald Trump. Every single response is focused on protecting the president, not on ensuring that justice is served for Epstein's victim, not on pursuing leads wherever they may go, not on maintaining the integrity of federal law enforcement. No, the singular focus is on protecting Donald Trump from any connection to Jeffrey Epstein. Now, I want to introduce you to someone who has been covering the Epstein case for years, someone who has direct relationships with victims, someone who has done the kind of investigative work that actual journalists are supposed to do. Her name is Tara Palmery, and she runs a Substack called The Red Letter, and she is also host of The Tara Palmery Show. She was close with Virginia Giuffre, one of Epstein's most prominent victims who tragically took her own life. And Tara has been raising some very important questions about how this document dump has been handled. In a video she posted just recently, she pointed out something crucial. She said, and I am paraphrasing here, that we all know why the Justice Department waited until literally 2 days before Christmas to dump this material. Think about that timing. 2 days before Christmas, when journalists are traveling, when newsrooms are operating with skeleton crews, when the American public is distracted by holiday preparations, when the news cycle essentially grinds to a halt. This is not an accident. This is a deliberate strategy to minimize coverage and scrutiny of these documents. Tara also raised a critical point about verification. She noted that there was a request back in 2019 to review the handwriting on that letter to verify whether it was actually written by Epstein. But the results of that analysis are not included in the documents that were released. So much of this, she says, was left without actually being investigated. All of these claims, all these tips, all of this material, and yet so much of it was never properly followed up on. There are accusations against President Trump in these documents. Did they ever actually investigate those accusations? Or are they just calling them false and unfounded without providing any details at all? This brings us to a fundamental question that I think every American, regardless of political affiliation, should be asking. What is the Department of Justice actually doing here? Are they pursuing justice? Are they following the evidence wherever it leads? Are they working to hold powerful people accountable for potential crimes? Or are they functioning as the personal defense team for Donald Trump? Because based on everything we are seeing, based on their behavior, based on their obsessive focus on protecting the president rather than investigating potential crimes, it certainly appears to be the latter. And that should concern everyone, not just liberals, not just Democrats, but everyone who believes that no one should be above the law. Now I want to draw a contrast here, because contrasts are important. They help us understand the true nature of what we are witnessing by comparing it to what normal behavior looks like. Think back to the Biden administration. Think about when a special counsel was appointed to investigate whether President Biden had broken the law regarding classified documents found at his residence. Documents that, by the way, Biden voluntarily surrendered to the DOJ as soon as they were discovered. Did the Biden Justice Department spam social media trying to defend the president? Did they go on a reply all rampage insisting that every allegation was false? Did they function as Biden's personal PR team? No, they did not. They allowed the investigation to proceed. They let the special counsel do his work. They accepted whatever conclusions were reached. That is how a legitimate Justice Department operates. That is how an institution that respects the rule of law conducts itself. Can you imagine what would have happened if the Biden Justice Department had behaved the way the Trump Justice Department is behaving right now? Can you imagine if they had gone through Twitter systematically replying to every outlet that covered the classified document story, insisting that everything was fine, that there was nothing to see here, that all allegations were false? The right-wing media ecosystem would have absolutely exploded. Fox News would have been running wall-to-wall coverage about the politicization of the Justice Department. Republican members of Congress would have been demanding investigations. MAGA influencers would have been screaming about corruption and cover-ups, and they would have been right to do so. Because that kind of behavior from a law enforcement agency is fundamentally inappropriate. And here is what is even more significant. Among Trump's own voters, even 12% said yes, they believe Trump was involved in Epstein's crimes. And only 66% of Trump supporters said, "How could you have been duped for so long? How could you have ignored all the evidence? All the warnings, all the red flags that were so obvious to the rest of us?" And honestly, that reaction is a classic misdirection tactic, and we should not fall for it. Yes, the authenticity of the letter is a legitimate question. Yes, it deserves investigation, but it is not the only thing that matters here. And the DOJ's desperate focus on it suggests they are more worried about managing the political narrative than about actually pursuing justice. Let me talk about something that I think is really important to understand about how the MAGA movement and the Trump administration operate, because it helps explain why they are behaving the way they are right now. The MAGA movement is fundamentally built on the idea that Trump is always right, always innocent, always the victim of persecution by shadowy forces who want to destroy him. Every scandal, every allegation, every piece of evidence that suggests wrongdoing is immediately reframed as proof of a conspiracy against Trump rather than evidence of actual wrongdoing by Trump. We have seen this pattern repeat over and over again throughout Trump's political career. When the Access Hollywood tape came out, it was dismissed as locker room talk, and the real story became the media's bias against Trump. When women came forward with allegations of sexual assault and harassment, they were attacked as liars, and the real story became the deep state conspiracy to bring Trump down. When the Mueller investigation uncovered extensive evidence of Russian interference and obstruction of justice, Trump declared total exoneration, and the real story became the witch hunt against him. When he was impeached for attempting to extort Ukraine, it was called a hoax, and the real story became Democratic overreach. When he was impeached again for inciting an insurrection, it was called a political hit job, and the real story became the persecution of innocent patriots. This pattern repeats endlessly, and it works, at least for the core MAGA base, because it gives them a way to maintain their belief in Trump, regardless of the evidence. Every piece of negative information becomes proof of the conspiracy rather than proof of wrongdoing. But here is the thing. There are limits to how far this strategy can be stretched. There are some allegations, some types of evidence, some categories of wrongdoing that are simply too serious, too visceral, too morally repugnant for even the most dedicated supporters to dismiss. And I think the Epstein connection is one of those things. Because what we are talking about here is not policy disagreements or political maneuvering or even ordinary corruption. We are talking about the sexual exploitation of children and young women. We are talking about trafficking. We are talking about crimes that virtually every human being, regardless of political affiliation, recognizes as among the most heinous acts imaginable. And when the Department of Justice is perceived as covering up potential evidence of such crimes, when they are seen as protecting powerful men who may have participated in such crimes, that crosses a line that even some devoted Trump supporters are not willing to cross. That is why we are seeing defections. That is why the polling is so devastating. That is why the patriotic blonde and others like her are publicly breaking with Trump and apologizing to the people they spent years mocking. The DOJ's frantic behavior is actually making things worse, not better. Every time they spam another reply insisting the letter is fake, they draw more attention to it. Every time they issue another statement defending Trump, they reinforce the perception that they are functioning as his personal defense team rather than as an impartial law enforcement agency. Every time they make claims without providing evidence, they undermine their own credibility and make people more suspicious that they are hiding something. This is the problem with damage control when you are dealing with something this serious. Normal spin tactics do not work. You cannot just flood the zone and expect the story to go away. Because the underlying issue, the connection between Trump and Epstein, the questions about what he knew and what he did, the perception that powerful people are being protected while victims are being ignored, these are not things that can be spun away. They demand real answers, transparent investigations, and genuine accountability. And the Trump administration's refusal to provide any of those things only deepens the suspicion that they have something to hide. I want to talk about the timing of this document release because it is actually quite revealing about the administration's strategy. They released these documents on Tuesday, 2 days before Christmas. Now, if you have any experience with media and communications, you know exactly why they chose that timing. The days immediately before major holidays are when news organizations are operating with skeleton crews. Reporters are traveling. Editors are on vacation. The news cycle essentially grinds to a halt as people focus on family gatherings and holiday celebrations. Releasing damaging information right before a major holiday is one of the oldest tricks in the crisis communications playbook. You dump the bad news when you know it will get minimal coverage, when journalists do not have time to fully analyze it, when the public is distracted by other things. By the time everyone comes back from the holiday, the story has already aged, and there are new developments demanding attention. It is a cynical strategy, but it often works. The fact that the administration chose this timing tells you everything you need to know about how they view these documents. They know the contents are damaging. They know the information is explosive. They know that full scrutiny of these materials would be devastating for Trump. So they tried to bury it in the holiday news desert. But here is the thing. It is not working this time. Despite the holiday timing, the story is breaking through. Journalists are analyzing the documents. It's Turkey. Social media is buzzing with discussion. The DOJ's frantic response is itself becoming a major story. And the defections from the MAGA movement suggest that the damage is real and lasting. You cannot spin your way out of everything. Some stories are too big, too important, too fundamentally disturbing to be buried by clever timing. And I think the Epstein connection is one of those stories. The American people want to know the truth about what happened. They want to know who was involved. They want to know why certain people were protected while others were prosecuted. They want to know whether their president participated in crimes against women and children. And no amount of holiday timing or Twitter spam is going to make those questions go away. Let me return to the contrast I mentioned earlier because I think it is so important for understanding the true nature of what we are witnessing. Think about how a normal, functioning Department of Justice would handle a situation like this. If documents were released that contained allegations against the president, A normal DOJ would say something like, "We are aware of these documents, and we will review them thoroughly. We are committed to following the evidence wherever it leads, regardless of who may be implicated. We do not comment on specific allegations while reviews are ongoing." That is what a professional, impartial law enforcement agency would say. It is measured. It is neutral. It does not prejudge the evidence or leap to defend anyone before an investigation is complete. Now think about what the Trump DOJ actually did. Before most people had even read the documents, they issued a combative statement specifically defending Trump. They declared allegations against him to be unfounded and false without providing evidence. They then launched a social media blitz, spamming replies to anyone who discussed the documents, insisting over and over that everything damaging to Trump was fake. This is not normal. This is not how serious institutions behave. This is the behavior of a political operation, not a law enforcement agency. And the American people can see the difference. The Biden administration faced its own document controversies. Remember the classified documents that were found at Biden's residence. Remember how that story dominated the news for weeks? Remember how a special counsel was appointed to investigate? Now think about how the Biden DOJ handled that situation. Did they spam social media, insisting that everything was fine? Did they issue preemptive statements declaring Biden innocent before the investigation was complete? Did they attack journalists who covered the story? No. They let the investigation proceed. They allowed the special counsel to do his work independently. They accepted the conclusions even when those conclusions were politically inconvenient. That is what institutional integrity looks like. That is what respect for the rule of law looks like. And the contrast with how the Trump DOJ is behaving right now could not be more stark or more damning. I remember during the Biden document situation, Republicans were absolutely apoplectic. They demanded investigations. They held hearings. They screamed about double standards and cover-ups. And you know what? Some of that criticism was legitimate. It is fair to scrutinize how any president handles classified materials. It is appropriate to demand accountability when there are questions about potential wrongdoing. But where is that same energy now? Where are the Republicans demanding answers about Trump's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein? Where are the hearings about why the DOJ is acting as Trump's personal defense team? Where is the outrage about a Justice Department that seems more interested in protecting the president than in pursuing justice for trafficking victims? The silence is deafening, and it tells you everything you need to know about the moral bankruptcy of the current Republican Party. They do not actually care about accountability or rule of law or justice. They care about protecting their leader. No matter what he may have done, no matter who may have been hurt, no matter what principles they have to abandon in the process. But while Republican elected officials may be circling the wagons, the American people are not buying it. We talked about the polling earlier, but I want to revisit it because I think the numbers deserve emphasis. When 46% of Americans believe that the president was involved in crimes committed by one of the most notorious sex offenders in modern history, that is a political crisis of the first order. When only 30% are willing to say definitively that they do not believe Trump was involved, that means the overwhelming majority of Americans either believe he was involved or are not sure. Think about what that means for Trump's political standing. Think about what it means for the Republican Party that has tied itself completely to this man. Think about what it means for the MAGA movement that has built its entire identity around the idea that Trump is a righteous warrior fighting against corrupt elites. The Epstein connection shatters that narrative completely. It suggests that Trump is not fighting the corrupt elites. He is one of them. He is not draining the swamp. He is the swamp. He is not protecting the vulnerable. He may have been preying on them. And no amount of Twitter spam from the Department of Justice is going to change that fundamental perception. The defections we are seeing from the MAGA movement are just the beginning. I am absolutely convinced of that. The patriotic blonde may be one of the first high-profile accounts to publicly break with Trump over the Epstein revelations, but she will not be the last. Because here is the thing about movements built around personality cults. They are inherently fragile. They depend on maintaining the image of the leader as infallible, as righteous, as worthy of the devotion that followers pour into them. And when that image cracks, when the reality of who the leader actually is becomes impossible to ignore, the disillusionment can be swift and devastating. We have seen this pattern throughout history with various cult-like movements. The true believers hang on until the very end. But there is always a point where the contradictions become too great, where the evidence becomes too overwhelming, where the cognitive dissonance required to maintain faith in the leader becomes simply unsustainable. For some MAGA supporters, the Epstein connection is that breaking point. It is the thing they cannot explain away, cannot rationalize, cannot fit into the narrative of Trump as a heroic figure fighting for the common people. Because there is nothing heroic about what Jeffrey Epstein did. There is nothing righteous about associating with him. There is nothing defensible about a Justice Department that appears to be covering up potential evidence of crimes against women and children. I want to talk about where we go from here, because I think it is important to look beyond the immediate crisis and think about what this moment means for the longer term. The oversight Democrats in the House have made clear that they are not going to let this go. They have accused the administration of a criminal cover-up. They have demanded answers about the illegal redactions. They have vowed to get justice for the survivors. And their message to Trump is simple and direct. We are just getting started. That is significant. It means that even though Republicans control the House and can block most oversight efforts, Democrats are going to continue pushing for transparency and accountability. They are going to continue forcing document releases. They are going to continue asking questions that the administration does not want to answer. They're going to continue keeping this story alive even when the administration tries to bury it. And outside of Congress, investigative journalists like Tara Palmery are going to continue digging into these documents. They're going to continue interviewing victims. They're going to continue piecing together the puzzle of what really happened and who was really involved. The truth has a way of coming out eventually, no matter how hard powerful people try to suppress it. And I believe that over time, as more information emerges, as more documents are released, as more witnesses come forward, the full picture of Trump's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein will become impossible to deny or dismiss. The Justice Department can spam Twitter all they want. They can declare documents fake without providing evidence. They can issue combative statements defending the president before investigations are complete. But they cannot change the underlying reality. They cannot make the evidence disappear. They cannot erase the memories of victims. They cannot undo whatever actually happened between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. All they can do is delay the reckoning. And based on what we are seeing in the polling, based on the defections from the MAGA movement, based on the growing skepticism among the American public, that reckoning may come sooner than they expect. I want to address something that I think is really important for understanding why this story matters beyond the immediate political implications. Because at the end of the day, this is not really about Donald Trump. It is not about the Republican Party or the MAGA movement or the political fortunes of any particular faction. It is about justice. It is about accountability. It is about the fundamental principle that no one, no matter how powerful, no matter how wealthy, no matter how politically connected, should be above the law. Jeffrey Epstein ran what appears to have been one of the most extensive and horrific sex trafficking operations in modern American history. He abused countless young women and girls. He facilitated abuse by other powerful men. He operated for decades with apparent impunity, protected by his wealth and his connection. And when he finally faced justice, when he was finally held accountable, he died in prison under circumstances that remain suspicious to this day. The victims of Jeffrey Epstein deserve to know the truth. They deserve to know who else was involved. They deserve to know why certain people were protected while Epstein was prosecuted. They deserve to know whether the most powerful man in the world participated in the crimes that were committed against them. And they deserve a Justice Department that is committed to finding the truth, not one that is committed to protecting the president from embarrassing revelations. What we are witnessing right now is a fundamental betrayal of those victims. The DOJ's behavior sends a clear message. Protecting Donald Trump is more important than justice for the people who were abused. Maintaining the president's political standing is more important than holding powerful people accountable. The image of the leader matters more than the suffering of the vulnerable. That message is morally repugnant. It is antithetical to everything the Justice Department is supposed to stand for. And it should be unacceptable to every American, regardless of political affiliation. I keep coming back to that statement from Congressman Jim McGovern because I think it captures the essence of what is at stake here. The Justice Department's only client is the American people. Those words should be carved in stone above the entrance to the DOJ building. They should be the first thing every DOJ employee sees when they come to work in the morning. They should be the guiding principle that shapes every decision the department makes. But right now, under this administration, those words have been abandoned. The DOJ has forgotten who its client is. It has forgotten what its purpose is. It has been corrupted and compromised and transformed into something it was never meant to be. And the American people are watching. They are seeing what is happening. They are drawing their own conclusions. And based on everything we are observing, based on the polling, based on the defections, based on the public reaction to the DOJ's behavior, those conclusions are devastating for Donald Trump and the MAGA movement. Let me talk about what I think is going to happen in the coming weeks and months as this story continues to develop. First, I expect we are going to see continued document releases. Congress has forced the DOJ to release these files, and there are likely more to come. Each new batch of documents will bring new revelations, new questions, new potential embarrassments for the administration. The DOJ can try to bury these releases during holidays or weekends, but they cannot hide them forever. The information is going to come out, and each release will renew the cycle of scrutiny and criticism. Second, I expect the DOJ's behavior is going to become an increasingly major story in its own right. The spam replies, the combative statements, the obvious prioritization of protecting Trump over pursuing justice. These things are being documented and discussed, and they are going to become a significant part of the narrative around this administration. The DOJ is supposed to be above politics. When it so obviously abandons that principle, it undermines not just its own credibility, but the credibility of federal law enforcement more broadly. Third, I expect we are going to see more defections from the MAGA movement. The patriotic blonde is not an isolated case. You just have to be willing to put principle over personality, to value truth over tribalism, to care more about what is right than about what is politically convenient. And I hope you do too. Stay informed, stay engaged, and never stop fighting for what is right. I will see you in the next one.